You can now subscribe and save 20% every single time you get your rich, tasty CBD-infused coffee sent straight to your door. That's right, you can get your Strava Craft coffee sent straight to your door every 2, 3, 4, 6, or 8 weeks and save 20% off every single time with the Strava Craft coffee subscription. So check it out. Go to the website, StravaCraftCoffee.com, and see all of your options. Or you can use that code DNVR20 for your first order and get 20% off. And then you'll realize that you want to subscribe and get that stuff sent straight to your door. So you don't have to think about it. You don't have to realize you're out of coffee and make a coffee run in the morning. You'll be set up to go. Or you can come down to the DNVR bar and try out our Strava Craft cold brew that is on tap. And oh boy, it hits different. So check it out. StravaCraftCoffee.com. Get set up with a subscription or use the code DNVR20 to save 20% off.
Number one for the one and only DNVR. 2 goes out to Zach, Mace, RK, and the bar. 3 for Mr. B in that old trophy case. Number 4 we're still waiting for. Well, bring on the chase. Out on the field, a mile high, Broncos win is our desire. Couple with a break, crew and a friend, bleed orange and blue till the bitter end. Come and join us at the DNVR. We are DNVR.
Welcome in to the DNVR Broncos podcast presented by MSU Denver Online. Use the code DNVR Sports when you sign up for MSU Denver and get all of your application fees waived, which is a great setup over there. Rigorous and affordable programs taught by professors who bring the real world into the classroom there at MSU Denver. And MSU Denver students work twice as many hours as students attending any other Colorado institution. So check them out. And again, use that code DNVR Sports to get your application fees waived.
My boys, what's going on? Welcome back, RK. We got the whole gang together.
It's great to be back. Great to see you guys. And, it's funny. First of all, I think that Groundhog Day might be the dumbest tradition that we have in America.
It is.
Why?
I mean, just look. It's snowing out there wherever Groundhog Day is, and he saw his shadow. That doesn't make sense.
Oh, come on. Have a little fun, guys. I mean, it's a throwback to when
to have fun?
Yes, because a throwback to when people didn't really understand weather and came and had these folk legends and things like that to determine whether we're going to have winter. I mean, more winter and have an early spring. I mean, the whole thing is a farce, but it's fun. It gave us a great movie in Groundhog Day. I mean, I would argue that the thing that has kept Groundhog Day relevant over the last couple of decades has been the primacy in pop culture of the movie Groundhog Day.
Yeah, so I was going to say the movie Groundhog Day, haven't seen it in a long time, but if I remember correctly, the premise is that like the same thing keeps happening over and over again, right?
Yes, and there have been papers written on just how many days Bill Murray's weatherman character, Phil Connors, had to experience for example, to become a master ice sculptor, to become a master pianist, because he would have to have repeated the same thing over and over to pay $1,000 for a piano lesson to kick the student out so he could be classically trained and be able to perform in front of people. I mean, basically, he might have gone through that for thousands of years, perhaps.
Isn't it just a little too real right now, though? Like it's funny back then, but it's just a little too real since our lives have pretty much been Groundhog Day.
Well, yeah, 6 more weeks without a quarterback answer.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Is this kind of feels like Groundhog Day to me? That every offseason we're having some sort of conversation about what's next for the Broncos at quarterback, and I have to admit, I'm a little bit disappointed in the organization for allowing the news to get out that they were in on the Matthew Stafford trade, because based on the source in which that news came from, it tells me that they actually wanted that information out there. They, I don't know if they wanted the fans to know that they're, doing what they can to improve the quarterback situation. But to me, it's like if you didn't get in on the deal, you don't want anyone to know you were in on it. And now everyone knows that the Broncos were in on Matthew Stafford, and it tells you one thing, plain and simple. It tells you that the Broncos want to upgrade Drew Lock. It tells you that they're not confident in him and that they feel they need to upgrade the position.
Yeah,
and Ryan,
sorry, I was going to say it would have gotten out anyway because it would have gotten out from Detroit. That's the thing. I think some of this getting out was preemptive strike, understanding that hey, Detroit's going to blab about who was in on the discussions. Probably Matthew Stafford's agent might say something as well. So this isn't a case where you had airtight control over leaks. So I think when you acknowledge that, you go ahead and let it get out.
I don't even know why Detroit would want that out, though. They'd just say, "Oh, we took the best deal that was available for us. There were 7 teams in on it, or whatever."
Especially when Detroit got a great deal that no one's questioning. No one's questioning. Like it's the complete opposite of the Rockies. Everyone's questioning. There had to be better deals out there for Nolan Arenado, right? No one's saying that with Detroit. And what is interesting is just how many sources have it, guys, about this news. The Broncos didn't try to keep this quiet, and like you said, Ryan, it's not good news for Drew Lock. And we have Lock Season in the comment section saying, hey, thoughts on sticking with Lock for another season? Just coming off this news of the weekend, it may happen because there may be no other options that the Broncos think are better, especially during what may be another COVID offseason. But what this tells me is George Paton doesn't want to do that. He does not want to roll with Drew Lock for one more season, with it just being, Drew Lock and a hedge quarterback that's not really even going to compete.
Yeah, and so it changes your outlook on things because it's been reported now that the Broncos made a play for Matt Stafford. It's already been reported by Mike Kliss that if Deshaun Watson becomes available for trade, which he already is, in my opinion, the Broncos will have a seat at the table. So now, if you're Drew Lock, you're saying, like, at best, I'm plan C. And, again, Drew Lock hasn't really done enough in the NFL to earn the right to be upset about that.
Right.
But at the same time, it doesn't feel good. It's got to be a bad feeling for someone who, did finish the season well and wants to be excited about his future with the Broncos. But, it should be very clear to him at this point that the Broncos aren't excited about their future with him.
Well, and Ryan, you said that Drew Lock is plan C right now. Well, there's only been A, B, and C as of right now. So he's last on that just because there's only been 2 quarterbacks that are potentially available right now.
Do you think maybe it's sort of it's also sort of a message to the entire team? Because I think if you look at what we're kind of learning about this, that George Paton, for Matthew Stafford at least, didn't really want to part with any key members of the young core of players, didn't really want to part with a Cortland Sutton or a Jerry Jeudy or a Bradley Chubb. I mean, do you think it's some of this is kind of messaging saying, all right, if somebody is among the worst at their position the previous year, there's going to be accountability. We're going to look for something better. And also even George Paton thinking, hey, I like what we've got here, but we're a quarterback away.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally fair. I think for the rest of the roster, it's a comforting feeling that it comes out that he didn't want to trade away any of them. You feel a lot better about your standing. Unfortunately, there is a very possible and potentially likely scenario that Drew Lock is going to need to be the leader of your team, and he's the one who you tried to replace. So it's just an awkward situation, and it bears the question: okay, now what? And like we mentioned, Deshaun Watson a little bit, and obviously that's the dream scenario. It has been since all of these quarterback talks came up in the first place. And you look over to DraftKings Sportsbook, where the odds on Deshaun Watson's next team have been fluctuating pretty consistently. And the Broncos now find themselves in a better position than they did a little while ago. although in terms of standing, not much better. But in terms of odds, the Broncos have moved to plus 800, 8-1 to land Deshaun Watson. I don't remember the lowest it had gotten. I know it was never lower than Matthew Stafford, who was as high as plus 500. But I know the Broncos dropped all the way to plus 1,100 at one point to land Deshaun Watson. So for whatever reason, the people at DraftKings Sportsbooks thinking that the Broncos now have 8-1 odds. The teams in front of them, Carolina Panthers at 3-1, New York Jets at 5-1, San Francisco 49ers at 5-1, Miami Dolphins at 6-1, Houston Texans at 7-1, Washington Football Team at 7-1, and the Chicago Bears, they're tied with the Broncos at 8-1.
Man, what's incredible about those odds is just where the Texans stand at 7-1. And honestly, that may be too high for them, even because what's crazy is when this opened up at DraftKings Sportsbook like a month or so ago, guys, a couple of weeks ago, they were minus 125, minus 150. Yeah, minus 110 now all the way to plus 700. So I hope you didn't get in then, but get in now if you believe he's going to stay with the Texans there. And what's crazy is the rise that the Carolina Panthers are taking. I think even when these odds came out, they were behind the Broncos, and now they've skyrocketed. And of course, he went to college around there. And so they're really, really picking up steam. And Carolina was really involved in the Matthew Stafford talks, and they reportedly were willing to give up the 8th overall pick in order to get Matthew Stafford. So, man, Houston, if Houston wants to get the best deal for Matthew or for Deshaun Watson, it very well may be Carolina because of how much they were willing to give up for Matthew Stafford. How much would they be willing to give up for Deshaun Watson?
And the thing with Carolina is it's starting at the top with their owner, David Tepper. This is something that where they're looking to make a splash move. That's why they were in on Stafford. Now, what's interesting is that they were coaching Zach's boy, Mac Jones, down at the Senior Bowl last week. So they got the up-close view of him. But then on the heels of coaching Mac Jones, they were trying to get Matthew Stafford and now appear to be in and willing to give up an awful lot to get Deshaun Watson. I mean, now the awful lot, I think there's one untouchable part of the awful lot that Carolina would not give up, and that, of course, is Christian McCaffrey. But I think they're salivating at some possibilities of getting Deshaun Watson back there with McCaffrey and being able to jumpstart a franchise that has been kind of stagnant the last few years. And of course, you have a motivated owner who has a lot of cash and can easily take on that contract and take on other contracts and put the money in escrow. So it's a resource-rich organization, and I'm not surprised that they're in on Deshaun Watson at all, especially because in the NFC, there's an opportunity here. Aaron Rodgers getting older, Tom Brady in his 40s. It's not like the AFC in terms of how stacked it is with quarterbacks. There's an opportunity in a window here for Carolina to get Deshaun Watson and really rearrange the chessboard in the NFC.
Mace, you said something really interesting right there. And so I have two quick questions for you guys. When we talk about Deshaun Watson potentially to the Broncos, is there anyone that's off limits on the Broncos roster in a potential trade?
Not even close.
Shouldn't be.
Is there anyone in the NFL that's off the table? Of course, put Patrick Mahomes and potentially a few other quarterbacks aside. Is there any non-quarterback that should be off the table in a potential Deshaun Watson trade?
Not at all.
There shouldn't be.
McCaffrey.
There shouldn't be. I'm just kind of familiarity with their thinking is that they would not want to trade Christian McCaffrey for Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, that's fair.
They wouldn't want him to deal.
Christian McCaffrey's been a heck of a player, and Panthers haven't been very good.
If the Panthers if the Texans come to the Panthers and say, all right, we love everything about this deal, put in Christian McCaffrey and the deal's done, and they say no, they're idiots. Right. I would agree. And boy, I mean, that would be an enticing trade for the Texans to make, because then, they're getting draft picks back, but then they're also getting a big selling point, and that organization needs every single selling point it can get. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if for some reason you're interested in getting in on the Broncos at plus 800 or even the Texans at plus 700, I mean, as much as I don't think he's playing there, the value of somehow they bridge the relationship and fix it 7-1. I mean, they're the ones who have him on their team right now. Mm-hmm. So if you want to get in on that, you can, of course, go to DraftKings Sportsbook. Use the code DNVR when you sign up. It's honestly a great time to get in on DraftKings just because of all the incredible Super Bowl props and odds they have going on there. And we're actually going to have DraftKings, the DraftKings head of Sportsbook on DNVR Bets Daily today, talking about all these odds and props. So that'll be exciting.
Okay, to specify, though, on those odds, that's the odds of being the week 1 starter, correct?
That is the way it was described for Matthew Stafford, which I believe is the same way here. It is player, what team will he take his first snap of the next season with?
Okay, so in other words, if he holds out and he doesn't see the field for Houston, and then they trade him at the deadline, and he's making his first snap in week 8, that's what it is. And so I can actually see why Houston has such low odds in that, because if they play hardball, I think Deshaun Watson's going to play hardball with them, and he's going to call their bluff, and he's not, and he may not call their bluff, and he may just sit there and hold out and take the fines and know that he's going to be able to have more than enough money to pay them on the other side. I think if they don't trade him in the offseason, this ends up being like Carson Palmer 10 years ago, where it goes close to the deadline, and then a QB desperate team pulls the trigger at midseason and then gets their guy.
And we got a commenter here saying Watson, they'll be fine. Watson will stay put in Houston. So there you go. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook, put your money where your mouth is, and you'll get 7-1 if you're right.
And I like the comment says, this is not the old Texans. It's a new GM and coach. Yeah, it's a new GM and coach, but apparently the same incompetent people that have caused this mess in the first place are pulling the strings in terms of Cal McNair and Jack Easterby.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, it's the same owner. Like we said, if they want to get this solved, the team probably has to be sold for Deshaun Watson to come back at least on really happy terms.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so where does that leave the Broncos with their options? Deshaun Watson is the pipe dream. They have the 9th overall pick in the draft, which they could obviously move up from if they want to. And then there are some, I don't know what the word is, fringe guys who could be available. These are your Sam Darnolds of the world. There's Dak Prescott, who maybe could come available next year, it seems like. Maybe probably not very soon. And then you have your draft picks, or you have Drew Lock. So let's just say that Matthew Stafford and Deshaun Watson are now off the table. Where is Drew Lock in those 3 options? Trade for a new guy that isn't one of those high-profile quarterbacks, draft a quarterback, or roll forward with Drew Lock.
Well, there's 2 conflicting things when I think of this, at least. The Broncos were willing to give up equivalent of a first-round pick in order to get Matthew Stafford. That's investing a lot in a quarterback. That's saying that, well, we're just not uncertain about Drew, that, no, we need a big upgrade there. So that tells me that the Broncos are willing to make a big move. However, just with it being the COVID offseason, I'm just a little hesitant that the Broncos are going to want to go with a rookie, especially with just how much time all year the Broncos staff, the Broncos players, Vic Fangio, Pat Shurmur just consistently said it was really tough with a young group and a young quarterback with no offseason to get this going. So that makes me think, maybe the rookie waits one more year in this, even though I think that what we've seen from George Paton is that he would be willing to invest the 9th overall pick in a quarterback right now. So that's what's pulling me and going both ways. I mean, guys, where do I fall in this tug of war?
Well, where does Vic Fangio stand, and what does his status have in terms of this type of deal? Because Vic Fangio, I'm sure, would have been thrilled to have Matthew Stafford, somebody to come in and improve the quarterback position immediately. If George Paton has a conviction on Zach Wilson and says, okay, I've watched the film, this is the guy, has a conviction on Justin Fields, and decides to try to move up to get him, that is George Paton with a 6-year deal, knowing he has time, but potentially dooming Vic Fangio here going into his contract year by not providing kind of that immediate upgrade to the position, at least an upgrade that would bear itself out in more wins in 2021 in all likelihood. So you have these warring factions. If Peyton wants to do right by Vic Fangio, it's somebody who could, if not Stafford, it's somebody who could step in and save the season. Ideally, in that case, you'd be talking about a bridge quarterback, a hedge quarterback with upside, rather than a hedge in his 30s who is strictly a bridge. Like if you brought Drew Lock back, but then signed Andy Dalton, and Dalton had to come in and play and did well, yeah, he might be able to guide you to a 9-7 season and get you the playoffs, but no one in their right mind would think that Andy Dalton was the long-term future. You'd be going into the 2022 quarterback market looking for your guy.
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario there, and I think that the plan A for the Broncos at this point would be that in terms of bring back Drew Lock, and this is assuming no Deshaun Watson. Bring back Drew Lock, bring in a young quarterback who has upside. So maybe it's Marcus Mariota, maybe it's Jameis Winston, maybe it's Sam Darnold. Although Sam Darnold is the one where I think if you brought him in, there would be probably at least a few people in the organization thinking he was going to be the starter, and Drew Lock had to fight for the job, not the other way around. But those sort of names seem like they would be plan A for me, rather than going into the draft or making another trade for a different quarterback.
And I think George Paton, I have to go back to what I heard right after he was hired, that don't be surprised if George Paton really takes a step back this year, especially with that 6-year contract, and just lets everything play out from his staff to Vic Fangio to the personnel department to the players, and just let him see it firsthand how everything's going, and then changes will start clicking in about 11 months from now, and that's when we'll see George Paton really take over. So if I'm guessing, I think it's Andy Dalton and Drew Lock combo, and Drew Lock does get the nod in training camp over that, and that's what we're talking about. And guys, it kills me to say, because that's not what I want. That's about the least sexy option out there, because we knew there was going to be a move at quarterback, and Andy Dalton's going to cost you $7 million. So I mean that's a sizable move compared to the Jeff Driscoll move they made last year, which was only a couple $1 million. But I don't think right now that George Paton is going to fall in love with the Zach Wilson and trade multiple first-round picks, because that just may be too aggressive and potentially too reckless for him to do his 4th month on the job.
And there's another thing that factors into this, and it's next year's draft class. And I'm not just talking about quarterback, I'm talking about overall. This year's draft class, a lot of questions, short season, no combine. I think it would behoove the Broncos, for multiple reasons, to trade down and accumulate 2022 capital, because let's say it's Drew Lock plus that veteran hedge. I really hope it's an upside hedge rather than the Dalton, Tyrod Taylor, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Nick Foles 30-something hedge, but I'm prepared for a 30-something hedge. So you trade down, and somehow you get a first-round pick in 2022 as part of the trades down, as part of the capital that you get. If Drew Lock proves that he's the answer long-term and you're not in the quarterback market, phenomenal. Then you've got additional draft capital in a draft that should be much better overall than this year's, because not only do you have all the questions about this year's class in terms of not having the 2020 season for some guys, or having a limited season for a lot of guys, but also you have a bunch of players that are taking advantage of that 1-year waiver that you have to go back and play in 2021. So the class in 2022 should be deeper at a lot of positions. If Drew Lock is the answer, great. You have more capital to go fill other needs. And if Drew Lock isn't the answer, you have more capital to move up and get a quarterback. And I kind of come back to the Sam Howell scale. If I love Sam Howell for next year, I don't love Zach Wilson or Justin Fields more than I love Sam Howell. And if that's how George Paton feels, or maybe his guy Spencer Rattler or Keaton Slovis, and if that's how George Paton feels, then he should stand pat on the quarterback in the draft this year and not pick a guy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I disagree with you, but if that's the way you feel, you definitely, for the Broncos, they're not necessarily in a desperation situation. And I've reiterated this every single day that we've talked about this quarterback. I still believe in Drew Lock. I truly believe if he gets that opportunity, he's going to take it and run with it. And I don't know how good he's going to be, but I think what you saw towards the end of the season will be where he's building from. Not what you saw in the middle of the season is where he's going to be starting from, and that's going to be his baseline. I think you'll see his floor raise, and of course his ceiling raise, and we'll see what happens if that's the case. So that's why I think you see George Paton dip his toe in the Matthew Stafford trade. As soon as it gets a little too spicy for him, he's like, all right, yeah, I'm out on that. You can kind of do that with Drew Lock. And yes, are you going to be a little concerned about the way things could go with Drew Lock? Of course. But he leaves you in a position where you have a young quarterback who at least some people in the organization believe in. And it allows you to test the waters without being desperate. Now, if Deshaun Watson comes available, I say act as desperate as you can to try and make that deal happen. But other than that, you don't have to make any rash decisions. You don't have to just draft someone at 9 because you told the fans that you were going to, like you did with Paxton Lynch. Remember they bring in Mark Sanchez and they say, oh, this is just one piece of the puzzle. This is just the first step. Well, then you had your hands tied and Paxton Lynch was there. You kind of had to take him. You had to do something at quarterback or else you were stuck with Mark Sanchez. Of course, that set you back. So the fact that you don't have to be desperate here, I think, is an important part of the scenario. And I think George Paton showed you in the Matthew Stafford talks that he is not going to just make a crazy aggressive. I mean, if he made that same trade or a similar trade for Matt Stafford, we'd be questioning it right now. And, 2 first-round picks in Drew Lock, we would say, whoa, that's a lot to give up for Matthew Stafford. Now, I know the Goff contract played a role in those deals, but it seems like he knows he doesn't have to do anything crazy right now. He's not desperate. There's no Super Bowl window closing in on him. And so he can say, hey, what do you guys want? Oh, okay, that's too much. I'm out. And Drew Lock is not the worst plan, whatever he may be to the organization.
And that's why I understand if the Broncos go that route, especially just that they're not desperate right now. George Paton has 6 years to get this thing figured out. And what's important to remember, especially when it comes to the draft and this year with George Paton, is he's only going to be on the clock for 4 months in terms of preparing for the draft with the Denver Broncos and their staff, whereas everyone else has had 12 months to do this. So it wouldn't be a surprise for him to sit back and see how this plays out. But man, if they go Drew Lock into hedge, give me a Jameis Winston hedge. Give me a Gardner Minshew hedge. And like we said yesterday, guys, Gardner Minshew is someone that I think Vic Fangio can get behind because of that low interception rate. He started 20 games in the NFL, only has 11 interceptions. That's something that Vic Fangio just preached over and over and over last year about how the Broncos offense just needs to stop turning the ball over. And Gardner is a guy that comes in, could fit Vic Fangio's want for not turning the ball over, and then also provide an upside. And also, I mean, a competition with Gardner and Drew, that'd be a blast.
Yeah, give me Gardner Minshew or Jameis Winston, even though they don't have similar skill sets. I think there's some similar upside there with the two because, Jameis Winston, of course, has those spectacular flashes to him. And Gardner Minshew not only has the low interception rate, but as we saw when the Jaguars came in back in the 2019 season, remember how he bought time and moved around the pocket and escaped and gave his receivers time to break off their routes and kind of freelance a little bit. That's the sort of thing that I think would mesh incredibly well with Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. If he buys time for them to get open and exhaust the defensive backs downfield, I think that would lead to some huge plays. I'd be excited about either one of them because I do think there is potential for both Minshew and Winston to flourish if they had to come in and be the long-term answer.
Yeah. A lot of there's semi-exciting options out there. There's really exciting options out there, and there's some not so exciting options out there. We'll see which way the Broncos end up going, if they go in any direction, honestly. And the last thing I want to ask on Deshaun Watson, to finish on a more exciting note here, or maybe not, is did the price for Deshaun Watson go up with the Matthew Stafford trade?
I would say yes, but you have, I believe it was John McClain, right, coming out yesterday and saying that the price for Deshaun Watson would be at least 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and 2 defensive starters. And to me,
God.
I mean, that's just giving up, 2 seconds and another starter, more than what the Rams gave up for Jared Goff. I would think that deal for Stafford would have drove the price up. But I mean, if that's the price, 2 1s, 2 2s, and 2 starters on defense, easy.
Yeah, I think the Watson deal is it's operating on another plane from any other deal. I think this is, if we're talking about comps, I mean, it's a comp like the Herschel Walker deal of 1989 between the Vikings and Cowboys, and the Stafford trade I think is immaterial in the Watson discussion. That being said, what John McClain put out there, Zach, with that trade off for those parameters you mentioned, I'm basically, if I'm an organization and I can get Deshaun Watson, I'm saying, shut up and take my picks and my players. Here you go. 100%.
Yeah, so for the Broncos, Bradley Chubb is obviously one in there, you think, as you're putting together a package of 2 defensive starters. Who's the other most desirable player/contract on the defensive side of the ball for the Broncos?
Is it a sign and trade with Justin Simmons?
I mean, that's so unusual in the NFL, though.
It is. So you don't think it would include, because I think far and away he's the second most valuable guy on defense.
I do too. But when's the last time a sign and trade happened in the NFL?
It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen.
Is it even allowed?
Well, what if the Texans say, you know what, Denver and George, I think you guys would have a really strong play. Why don't we keep this deal under wraps for 1 week? You sign Justin Simmons right now and then trade him.
Yeah, well, I just asked because I know in the NBA, like the Nuggets had signed Bol recently, and then when they were talking about potential packages for James Harden, it said like, oh, Bol can't be a part of this because he was signed too recently. So maybe there's something you can do where it's like a side agreement that, okay, well, Justin Simmons is going to negotiate a long-term deal with the Texans when he gets there, but you can't do it before.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. But let's say it isn't Justin. Who would that second piece be? Because when I go through this defense, I mean, you can't do Shelby Harris. He would be the exact same camp. Draymond? Okay. I was thinking, what about Alexander Johnson as well?
Yeah,
maybe. But Draymond Jones is the name that seems to keep popping up anytime this sort of speculation comes up, because young player, 2 years left on his contract, has proven that he has one premier skill set to him, and that is being interior pass rusher. And it's fair to look at Draymond Jones and say, if you're another team looking at this defense and say, that's a piece that can really help us out going forward for the long term, he could blossom into a guy who's getting double-digit sacks from the interior.
Yeah. I mean, build the George Payton statue if he gets that one done. That's all I'm saying. Whatever if that's what it takes, Broncos should absolutely be on the forefront of that deal. Now, maybe they're setting the price low in hopes of sparking a bidding war, in which case you'd have to see what it gets to. Everyone knows I don't have a limit, so just do what it takes to win the bidding war. But I'm sure there are people out there who would have a limit, and that's understandable. And George Payton is probably one of them.
And yesterday, or over this weekend, Woody Page made it very clear on Twitter that the Broncos would not be in on one of these deals. But then you have Mike Kliss come in last night and say the Broncos would have a seat at the table for Deshaun Watson. So that keeps this conversation open, keeps that spark lit, and keeps the excitement going for the dream.
Right. And I believe James Palmer said that from everything he's heard, Deshaun Watson would not rule out Denver as a landing spot.
Not too cold for him?
Kareem Jackson's doing his work. Kareem Jackson's doing his lobbying. I mean, that maybe that's the secret weapon in all this is Kareem Jackson. And if somehow Kareem Jackson convinced Deshaun Watson that Denver was the place that he wanted and needed to be, then you call Kareem Jackson into the office and say, whatever you want over the next 5 years, salary wise, take it. Give us, just write down a number and we'll pay you.
I thought you were going to say just build a statue for him as well. George Payton and Kareem Jackson holding their hands up together.
Yeah. I mean, Deshaun Watson in the middle.
He's Deshaun's like ducked under, like running through.
Oh, man. Exactly. I love it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'm there for it.
And then also Alexander Johnson, high school teammate of Deshaun Watson. And there's another person who maybe could be in his ear, positively, or we'll see what you guys think. Demaryius Thomas. They were teammates briefly. Maybe DT is saying, hey, dude, the fans in Denver are incredible. You should have them on your list. You would love to play there. Or maybe he's saying, don't drop any passes or else you'll be historically underappreciated if you go to Denver.
Right, exactly. But that would be a good resource, a guy that's not with the Broncos right now. That'd be a good person for Deshaun to call.
Yeah, and I think they did have a pretty good relationship during the brief time that they spent together there. So,
man, just there's some hope alive still.
We will find out. We'll see if any developments happen soon. I'm interested to see at what point do the Texans break down their walls and start actually talking to teams about this, or publicly accepting that this is going to happen, because their stupid press conference on Friday was embarrassing how little they acknowledged it, I thought. But we'll see what happens. Of course, we're going to move over to the podcast side of things. Make sure you hit the thumbs up, you subscribe with us, and of course, sign up for alerts. But for now, we're moving over to the podcast side of things. You can catch us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just search DNVR Broncos Podcast. We'll see you there.